Mr. Andrade, good evening.
Good evening.
And thank you for being at all three of these events. We appreciate it. Mr. Andrade, I'm sorry, should there be changes in the way values are set in New Bedford? As you may know, an evaluation company is hired at some point every few years to kind of make those decisions, or at least give the Board of Assessors input on setting values.
I believe, from my understanding, there's actually people that are employed in the assessor's office that actually go around and they do preliminary investigations of homes, take photos, and then there's a formula that's set by the state that they use. So there's people that are employed by our city. There's a department, the assessor's department, and there's employees in that department and a department chair. The employees from that department are assigned homes and neighborhoods. They go out, they assess those homes, and they use market value and a formula that also includes basically looking at a home based on the year it was built and what homes of that nature are going for in the market. And typically it's a 2-year setback, like the evaluation for this year will be based on the market value 2 years ago. And that market value is also influenced by your proximity to the other properties that are near you. So this does need to change because it places a tax evaluation on what the market defines a home's value as, which is something that's defined by basically those that have capital and have either a will or no will to buy a home in a community. And those numbers can fluctuate based on a lot of things, and they could be manipulated. If you wanted to gentrify a community and you had access to a tremendous wealth, say I ran a wind company and I wanted to put offshore wind in New Bedford, and the area where I wanted to have a parking lot, there were homes there. If I had a corporation or several individuals hypothetically buy homes at $70,000 above the market rate, that would, over time, increase the property value in that neighborhood, and thus, for communities that have a higher level of seniors and retired folks or people on a fixed income, it could push them out. Another aspect of the evaluation that's problematic is that is the Proposition 2.5, which every year the levy goes up to 2.5%, and that is every year that's happening. So there's no cause for that necessarily to go up. It's just predefined. There was a vote that went in, and I believe it was 1980 or 1990 that allowed for that. So every year, whatever the levy limit was, is going to be an increase of 2.5, and that's flawed in nature. In addition, when new properties come on, the limit can go up. But if properties come off, we lose properties, then the valuation of what limit of a levy we have in our community can't change. So these are issues that are concerning around how the valuation currently works.
I'm confused. Were we going to do opening statements tonight?
Yeah, I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
You got a 1 minute open.
It's your show.
Well, it's your show.
My name is Erik Andrade, and I'm running for tax assessor of the city of New Bedford. The reason I'm running for tax assessor is, as Mr. Andrade, Buddy Andrade, was speaking about earlier, last year we started advocating in our community, not just about people coming out to vote, but people getting engaged in the process and becoming candidates, and looking at all the roles, because oftentimes the only roles that I myself knew about the responsibilities for were city councilor, mayor, school committee. So tax assessor was on this election, so we try to encourage other folks to run for it. And in trying to get folks to run for it, I went and tried to do research on what exactly the role of tax assessment was. And when I started looking at tax assessment, my concern was around how the tax assessment in our community can contribute to gentrification in our community and the displacement of folks, based on the fact that the valuation of homes is such determined on something so unfair as the free market, and with organizations and corporations buying homes in our community for over property values over $50,000 above the market rate. This is going to change the valuation in our community and the tax burden that our citizens are faced with. And there's not enough exemptions. There's currently exemptions for elderly over 70, veterans, and people with disabilities, but there's nothing for people on a fixed income. So this is a way that the property value goes up, or the levy goes up on your house, and now your income is significantly limited because it's debt, and this debt could lead to people being displaced or rents going up and further displacing community.
Thank you, and thank you for coming again tonight, Erik. So the last debate, we talked about using the assessors race to have a platform to raise the issue of gentrification. But in reality, it's only the state legislators who can change the state laws that govern assessments. So given that that's the case, and if you are elected, would you pledge to make assessments according to the state's current regulations for assessing property?
The assessments are actually done by the people in the assessment department that are employed by the assessment. The assessors only review those assessments. So, yeah, I think part of your point speaks to the ability for somebody that's not in a role to advocate for change. Martin Luther King held no public office. John Lewis held no public office till much later in his life, and they were able to impact change. Jabril Kazan in our city was able to impact change. In or outside of a position, we can impact change in terms of advocacy. The advocacy, you're right, has to happen on a statewide level, and there has to be a change, but part of that change has to happen internally. And when we have a position inside of a room, when we're at the table, we're able to bring that conversation inside, and we're able to get a better understanding of the current process. And also, as somebody that's concerned about displacement of families, I can work to advocate internally for those folks that do have the ability to have exemptions, to learn about how they can apply for an exemption and the roles that those exemptions play in our community.
Mr. Andrade, what skills do you bring specifically to this job so that you can do the job of assessor?
Well, the job of the tax assessment in terms of the actual assessment of the properties, the initial value assessment, is not something that the elected assessors do. The elected assessors review the work, and in particular, if there is a request for a challenge of the valuation, then there's a review of that. And I think that for me, one of the strong suits that I bring to the table is the ability to look at systems. I was trained as a computer scientist. I have a bachelor's of science in computer science, and what you do as a computer scientist is you look at programs, and if there's a flaw in a program, you debug that program, and you come up with a solution to that. And what I see currently is that the current formula of how we're assessing property value is flawed, so we have to think of a creative way to solve that and remedy that issue. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is I'm a creator, I'm an artist, and I think creatively. As a result, I have critical and analytical thinking skills as professionally and also professionally as a professional artist. And the third thing is, outside of those roles, I'm a community activist and organizer, and I've been organizing for a long time on a statewide level, a national level, and a local level. So those skills all, I think, intersect and offer a unique opportunity for somebody that's going into this position from a unique set. There's 3 other assessors, so the best systems work when there's a diversity of voices and ideas, and I think that having a diversity of voices and skill sets is going to be an asset to our community.
What would you do if you were an assessor and a taxpayer complained to you that a regulation was unjust? It was a regulation that was on the books, and the assessors were just following the regulations when they made their evaluation, but the taxpayer called you and said, well, that's an unfair rule. What would you do in that case?
What I just said in the beginning is that I believe already, I'm telling the taxpayers right now that the system is unfair already. I'm educating folks and speaking out that it is unfair. As an elected assessor, I can support them in understanding the process to challenge the assessment they have on their home and give them guidance on that, and I can point them in the direction of how they can advocate on a statewide level to address the larger picture. For their specific situation, there's no promises that we can make because, as has been said, the system right now, as is designed and is flawed. Being elected into the position doesn't grant you the ability to magically wave a wand and change how the entire system works. Change, unfortunately, takes a lot of time and it takes advocacy. I would support that person with their specific application to challenge the assessment and point them in that direction, and that's all the assessor is able to do legally. There's no legal ability to change because the way it's defined by the Department of Revenue is currently set. And that's why I believe that in this position, a big role of this position is to advocate, educate the community, and then to mobilize to get a change to happen.
Mr. Andrade, would you become, I would think, the way you're describing your positions and the job, you become pretty frustrated pretty quick in that job.
I mean, as African people living in America, people have been frustrated for a long time, and there is a reality that it is frustrating to be in unjust systems and to see injustices, and that is a reality, and that can fuel your work and why you do your work, because you see an injustice and you work to remedy that. I've been at work in this community, which can be very frustrating because a lot of things are unjust and left the way they are, and I'm still here advocating for change and support. So yes, it is frustrating. I can imagine it will be frustrating, but I also imagine that this is a long journey. It's a marathon, and unfortunately change doesn't happen easily, but we have to find ways to sustain our vision. Other folks have gone through a lot more than I've ever could have gone through, and this frustration pales in comparison to some of the other frustrations that exist.
If you could change the assessing system in Massachusetts to a way that would help control gentrification better, what changes would you suggest?
I think that basing property value on the current market value is a flawed reality, because that can be manipulated very easily, and also it assumes that if those with wealth all of a sudden value, and it's a perceived value, value is perceived. If their perception of the value of homes in New Bedford changes and they're willing to pay more for a home in New Bedford, based on whether there is economic opportunity or whether it's just a perception, that value in the free market shouldn't define the levy of tax or the tax liability that a homeowner has. Perhaps someone buys a home at $100,000, and now, say because of property values change, that value changes up $300,000 over a period of time, over the lifetime of the home. Maybe the tax on that person's home should be based upon something different. Maybe it could be based on an income tax. Maybe we could have a cap on the amount it rises, or those on a fixed income could justify why they don't have to have this increase in their tax valuation. We could also look at the fact that currently with Proposition 2.5, there's automatically, intrinsically, a raise of 2.5% each year that happens. And why does that happen? That was voted on. It doesn't, there's no, when you look at the state's website, as far as I see, I don't see anything that justifies that increase. So that could be changed. Currently, the mayor is the only one that can override that. He's the only person that can override that 2.5% increase. So like in a situation where we're having people in economic struggles like COVID, and then we have it in the next 2 years with the increase in interest in our community and people buying homes for much more, the property value is going to rise up, and that means the liability is going to rise up. So addressing that increase and overriding that is one way. And I think that also just looking at the fact that the free market shouldn't be defining how we're looking at our expenses. It doesn't necessarily mean that your home is costing the community more, and also taxes shouldn't be something that put people in positions where they're pushed out of their homes or their lives suffer. Taxes are supposed to benefit our community through a common pooling of wealth to meet the needs of our community.
Mr. Andrade, thank you. You have 3 minutes to close, wrap up your campaign, thank whoever you'd like to thank, and speak directly to the voters.
I think that one of the things that is striking to me is how fast our community is changing. It's been a rapid increase. In September of 2013, the mayor had convened a steering committee to investigate the prospect of creating a cultural district in our city, and they were using this model called creative placemaking, which is designed to, one of the things that they outlined in their presentation was that it would increase property values. This cultural district was already predefined. There was a map that they created before going to the public, and they proposed that this is where culture was happening in our community. I believe culture happens everywhere. There's nowhere that culture doesn't go with us. We create culture, we are culture. So when we have this idea of in and out is often how we have inequities in our society. In the past, it was redlining. and not involve real estate doing that. And this, again, was a real estate move to increase property value downtown and increase tourism in our city. And as such, immediately there was pushback that this would gentrify our community. This was ignored. Most of the people that were on that board had business or interests that were in downtown. And many of them were real estate agents or arts and culture organizations. As we look now, and 8 years later, the property values in some areas have dramatically increased. The number of people that are homeless in our community has dramatically increased. The people that are squeezed for their day-to-day living because of this increase. And this is a disservice to our community. This was done through city planning. This was done through an intentional act. This is something that was championed by community foundations and other organizations in our community that weren't thinking about the impact. Sometimes we could have a good idea, and a good idea has a negative impact. That's what kind of led me to being really concerned with gentrification, was looking at this and seeing this was going to happen. And now I've seen several families that have been displaced from this community, and I look at the community as a very different place. I am not naturally somebody that wants to be in a political office. I'd rather be creating and working with young people or doing something different. However, what I'm seeing happening is that there is no priority made to protect our families, and the taxation of our community through the tax assessment is already impacting families. I already know homeowners that have been impacted by the regular increase in their property value, and I believe that with this rapid increase that we've seen in the last year, that this is only going to dramatically increase, and that the tax assessment is going to be a part of that equation that has been there already, but is going to be increasingly there based on the dramatic increase in interest in our community, and that this system is flawed. And I found out by just looking at it how flawed it is, and as such, I want to really advocate for that change and to see if we can create a consciousness that we can build a movement to realize that this is an issue. I don't think this is probably the first time that tax assessors office has talked about gentrification, I believe, in a debate. And that in itself is something that's important to think about. And I hope y'all vote for me on November 2nd.
Thank you, Mr. Andrade.